What does it take to do the impossible? What does it take to level up your game like never before?
Hey there, Rian Doris here with the Flow Research Collective, and welcome to today's module, which is the art of the one-day month. So today we're going to be talking about what the one-day month is, how the hell this could be possible, and then how to execute your own one-day month. So let's start with the mathematics of the one-day month. This is based on the premise, which is research-backed, that average knowledge workers focus for 11 minutes at a time before being interrupted. So the average knowledge worker ends up getting, according to the research, about 1 hour of accurate flow per day. That means being in flow, doing high leverage tasks that are going to move you towards your goals. So that's roughly 1 hour of accurate flow per day. According to the research, that's what the average knowledge worker gets done. And that means that the average knowledge worker gets about 22 hours of accurate flow done per month. So then the question becomes, to achieve what the average knowledge worker achieves in a month, in a single day, how do we fit 22 hours into one day? Well, what we can do is intensify the flow state, first off, and 2x the per hour output through a number of different things. Meaning we can have deeper flow states and higher leverage, higher productivity flow states that have more output than the average knowledge worker does in their 1 hour by doing a number of things that you know about. Avoiding task switching, focusing on one thing, because even if the average knowledge worker is doing about an hour's flow per day, they're still task switching, they're dispersed, and they're still distracted. So by eliminating distraction, by prepping and setting super clear goals, by entering flow fully recovered and slept in the first place, which most average knowledge workers do not, and by leveraging our biorhythms and rolling with it in terms of our energy, and turbo boosting things with the positive psychology basics, and then reducing cognitive load, we can intensify our flow states, and we can roughly double the amount of per hour output, the amount of actual accomplishment we're going to get per hour by doing these things versus each hour that the average knowledge worker does in flow. And that means that our 22 hours, so long as we do get that 2x increase in output, by dialing up the flow and making it more effective and geared, we can get basically 11 hours of executive athlete flow to equal 22 hours per month of the average knowledge worker's flow based on the actual output we're achieving. So all of a sudden, the entire month's worth of flow for the average knowledge worker, for us, so long as we're doing these practices, is roughly gonna take about 11 hours of deep time spent in flow on the highest yield activities possible. So the question then becomes, how do we get 11 hours of intense, deep flow into one day? How is that possible? Well, first off, we got to release all time assumptions. We've got to shatter our notions of what a standard day has looked like for us in the past, and be willing to really think from first principles. And then the second thing that's important to mention here is that the art of the one-day month is something you do sporadically. This is not, a format or a template for every day at all. It's something you do sporadically to get these spikes in your output and accomplishment and a number of other benefits that we're going to touch on later. So in order to get this 11-hour block of flow into one day, which equates to what an average knowledge worker accomplishes in a month, first thing we got to do is to not underestimate our ability. It's just basic starting point. Don't underestimate what you can pull off in a given single day. And then the second thing is that The 500% increase in output that McKinsey found in executives when they were studying executives in flow is actually not even an overreaction. You can get bigger increases in output than that. Think about the last time you were really discontent with how productive you were, or what that state felt like, when you were just so scattered and dispersed and half asleep and kind of maybe watching Netflix while doing some emails, while trying to finish up a task. Think about that time, the last time you were in that state. I guarantee it's possible to conceive of the fact that you could be 5 times more productive than that if you just turned off Netflix and focused on one task. What about if you got deep into flow? What about if you eliminated all of the redundancy within those tasks and ensured they were singularly focused on producing the key results? It's conceivable that you can be not just 5 times more productive than how the average knowledge worker works, but 10 times more productive. More than that, beyond that, elite performers can often accomplish full-time jobs. 8 hours of work per day for the average knowledge worker in an hour's work per day. This is not unheard of. An elite performer can go and do 10x the output. Within certain domains and certain specialities, elite performers can produce hundreds of times more output than average performers. And this is really well known in Silicon Valley. Software engineers can be this much better than other software engineers. There can be a 100x gap in what a software engineer can actually produce and accomplish. And the same thing applies to you versus the average knowledge worker. You can be 5, 10, 15, 20 times more effective than the average knowledge worker. So let's go back to how we get 11 hours of intense flow into one day to have a one-day month become a reality. So the first thing is preparation. We've got to identify the task within which we're trying to get into flow in the first place. And then what we've got to do is get clear goals set up for that task. And just on the note of identifying the task, ideally you use your one-day month for a single high leverage task. Let's say you've got to rebuild some massive complex system in your business, and it requires incredible deep work for a long period of time, and it's something that could take you weeks and weeks. That's a great example of something for a one-day month. Let's say you're writing a book and you want to get multiple chapters written by the end of the quarter. You could use writing as a task for your one-day month. If you're studying, if you want to learn a certain topic, you could use a one-day month for learning and diving deep into mastering a single topic. And you'd be shocked with how much mastery you can attain over a given subject with 11 hours spent in flow on that subject in one day. So the idea is that you want to identify some sort of high leverage task that is singular in focus, and then you want to lock in clear goals on that task. You want to know exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve with respect to that task, exactly what needs to happen with respect to the system, exactly what chapters you're going to write and how you're going to skeleton them out and what they're going to look like, exactly what you're going to study and read and take notes on and create, for example. The other thing that's required for preparation before you actually even do your one-day month is that you've got to be recovered. You've got to be really well slept. You've got to be, ideally well meditated, centered, grounded, and not dealing with too much chronic stress, and ideally dealing with no acute stressors. You don't want to do a one-day month if, you're just recovering from the flu, for example. Now, first thing in our one-day month, to break this down, is to wake up at 5 a.m., at least if you're a lark or a third bird. And then what you do is you run your first flow block from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. And again, within that flow block, you want to do your brief, cognitively unstimulating breaks when energy dips and ebbs and flows. But ultimately, you are singularly focused on one task, whatever your high priority, high leverage task that you're dedicating this one-day month to is, for 3 hours. Then we do our first batch of recovery via the positive psychology basics. We do maybe a quick workout, some yoga, some breath work. We have an ice cold shower. we're refreshed, ready to hit our second flow block from 9 a.m., let's say, till 12 a.m. So the second 3 hours we get in there. And then we got recovery 2 from 12 to 1 p.m. Here, maybe we have a nap, quick walk, some food or some fuel, and we stretch. It's our second little recovery burst. And at this point, we've done 6 hours of deep work, of time spent in flow. And then we have flow block 3 from, let's say, 1 to 3 p.m. We had another 2 hours of deep time spent in flow. And these afternoon chunks for most people tend to correspond to energy troughs, which is why this flow block's a little shorter and why a nap before that can, if you don't struggle with sleeping in the evening, be a great idea. And then we've got recovery 3 from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. So we're getting a longer recovery in there because, again, we tend to see that trough roughly between sort of, 12 to 5, different for different people, but there often is a kind of a trough in energy that you see showing up there. And so you've got a longer recovery here. You may have a brief nap, you may walk, you may do a full workout, fuel, stretch, a long meditation. Maybe you even jump in a hot bath or an ice cold bath for a little bit. And then you've got your final flow block 4 from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Another 3 hours. In this day, you've managed to get 10 intense, deeply focused hours of accurate flow into one day to make 11 hours, which, assuming you're able to produce double the output by being more focused on high yield activities and being more deeply in flow than the average knowledge worker, equates in terms of output and accomplishment to what the average knowledge worker accomplishes in an entire month. Now, some other benefits of the 1 day month. First off, it's actually going to have a trickle down effect that will improve all of your other work days because it will result in really good habit formation where you are getting used to training and deploying habits at that elite peak level for a 1 day month. And it's also going to train your physiology to be able to persist without stimulation and to focus for these elongated periods of time, to be content with that, with focusing on the thing that you're trying to focus on for an intense period of time. It's a little bit like if you go and do a boot camp, a workout boot camp, for example, or a Tough Mudder, then when you come back to your normal daily workouts, they're much easier. You're able to crush them at a higher level with the same level of exertion or effort. Next thing is it can raise your baseline performance and output because it expands your standards for what's possible. You realize, oh my God, I can get weeks of normal work done in a day. So your assumptions, your time assumptions get more favorable. You start to assume that you can achieve more in a given day. Your sense of what's acceptable for yourself in terms of speed and execution and production elevates. You can also get a heightened sense of meaning and active engagement. These 1 day months, these deep, creative dives of immense production, focus, and flow can be incredibly, incredibly meaningful because you've got space, you've got time to really think deeply and to go far into the zone, working on whatever your topic is. And again, of course, throughout this whole 1 day month, we've eliminated distraction. We're not engaging in any kind of stimulus at all. We're off the map, we're dark for this day. And then another thing is actually that if you have a family, you may be saying to yourself, I've got children, there's no way I could do this. Well, interestingly, the 1 day month can be extra beneficial and even necessary if you've got a complex personal life or a family, because it allows you to dip out of that intentionally and pre-schedule that dip out and get an immense amount of work done in a single block so that you can then emerge back into your more complex personal or family life with a huge amount of production already accomplished or done. The other thing is it can be the ultimate way to buy more of your life back if your goal is to work less. You might be saying to yourself, God, well, I don't want to cram 11 hours of work into 1 day and try and do a month's worth of work in 1 day. No way. Well, here's the thing. You don't really want to have to work very much. If you don't really want to have to work much at all, you can do a 1 day month once a week. and only do that and do no other work. And of course, you'd have to have a professional situation that would facilitate that. But a lot of people do. A lot of people have enough autonomy to be really only held to, weekly goals and things like that, and they get assigned tasks with a long lead time. And if you get into this habit, you can do 1 day of work a week and still be a high performer. We have tons of our alumni who have, what seem like highly demanding jobs that they get paid incredibly for. When they apply this kind of thing, they're able to do those full-time jobs in 1 day a week and kick it the rest of the time if they want, or focus on other hobbies or other primary flow activities and pursuits. Now, the next thing that's important to mention is some details for executing the 1 day month, because you've got at this point a conceptual idea of what we're talking about here, what we're aiming at. So let's talk about some non-negotiables for the 1 day month. First off is one task. We mentioned this. One ideally high leverage gaining, unlocking move that requires deep work and that requires individual contribution from you. Kind of doing a 1 day month for management, a little bit clunky, probably not going to be the best thing because it wouldn't necessarily work. So it's something that you are an individual contributor for. Second thing is the task fully lining up with clear goals, and those goals being small and chunked and scheduled onto your calendar. So when you define this one task that you're going to dedicate your 1 day month to, building this system, writing numerous chapters in your book, learning some new skill in one single day, you want to map out the subcomponents of that. So maybe you're learning a skill, you want to get a foundational understanding of how to code in a certain programming language in 1 day. So you do a little bit of prep in advance, you decide what books you're going to read, what programs you're going to test, and then you schedule that stuff onto your calendar, small and chunked out, so that you're not going into your 1 day month with this big amorphous mess of, task to break down and then complete. You want it to be broken down in advance so that you can execute. Again, you gotta sleep and recover the night before. No point even doing a 1 day month if you're running low on sleep or you're chronically stressed or under recovered. It's just going to exacerbate that state. You want to get your phone switched off, or ideally left at home all day. If you're going out to do your 1 day month somewhere else, if you're doing it at home, switch your phone off and put it in the garden shed or something like that to create some friction between you and your phone. And then everything except you and what you're working on is ideally blocked on your computer for the entire time, so that you are kind of unreachable, literally, because your phone's off and away, and you've used an app like Self-Control to block everything on your computer so that you're in this kind of impenetrable fortress of focus. Next thing is that you want to ensure that you are in a 100% disruption-free environment. If you're in an office, you're trying to do a 1 day month in an office with colleagues and people walking by you, it's going to be dispersed, not going to happen, no way. If you try and do one at home, at the kitchen table, and you've got kids coming back from school and leaving for school and a wife coming back from work or husband or whatever, it ain't happening. So you got to get to a disruption-free environment. That might mean doing it at home. If you've got that situation at home, it might mean checking yourself into a hotel for the day and just using the desk in the hotel room for the 1 day month. Might mean getting a 1 day pass for a co-working space. Might mean using a friend's, back garden office, whatever it is. But you got to get to a 100% disruption-free environment. The next thing is you want to let people know that you're going to be off the map for this day in advance. Let your team know, I'm off the map for Friday, I'm doing a 1 day month. Or I'm off the map for Friday, honey or whatever, I'm doing a 1 day month. You got to let people know in advance that you're off and that they will not hear from you for that entire day. Third thing, the next thing is recovery. You got to get the recovery in within the 1 day month. That's what's going to allow you to get so much time spent in flow. So your recovery has to be equally intense to the amount of time that you're aiming for in terms of how much time you're aiming to spend in flow. And the next thing is that you want this mindset of going in. You want each flow block to be like its own event. You want this mindset of, I'm shutting down, I'm going in. Almost like you're getting into a flight simulator or something like that. You want to try and think of each work block like that, where it's extreme in terms of how binary it is. It's like, okay, it's go time. do a little bit of breath work to set yourself up, and then boom, you lock in, you focus, and you push for multiple hours on end. Next thing you want to do is micro breaks within the flow blocks. Within your 3-hour flow block, take some micro breaks. When you're noticing your attention dip or a struggle phase is elongating more than it should be, pull it back, do some release exercises, stretch, meditate, glass of water, whatever it is. Important to do that. Nothing stimulating, obviously, whatsoever for the whole day of the 1-day month. And then we really got to resist self-distraction. This means that if we are starting to worry about things that, we're not checking in on because we're offline for the whole day, you want to deploy all of the tools for impulse control. That means have a note or a notepad where you get to write down concerns rather than actually diving back into your tech to check those concerns. That means when you notice an impulse to just quickly check, the status of some news thing that's coming up, do the 5x5 breath, 5 in through the nose, 5 out through the mouth, etc., to regulate and resist those impulses. The next thing you got to do for the 1-day month to be effective is you've got to make all decisions regarding that day in advance. You don't want to wake up the morning of the 1-day month and try and decide that morning where you're going to work. You ideally don't even want to have to set your work up the morning of the 1-day month. You want to be able to wake up and have automatized decision making, meaning not have to make any decisions. Your clothes are ideally prepped for you from the night before. Your commute is determined and decided upon. You've decided already if you're going to walk to wherever you're working or if you're going to get an Uber, so you don't have to wonder about that. Your food is all locked in and set up for the 1-day month day, the next day. And then let's talk a little bit about how to identify your highest leverage task. I'm going to give you some more examples so that you can really think about where you might deploy your 1-day month, what task you might use within your 1-day month. So some more obvious examples are, the obvious individual contributor roles, like a coder who's doing a lot of solo work. 1-day month's a no-brainer for them. In fact, a lot of the best coders are able to actually sustain 1-day months many days in repetition. But that might mean, if you're a coder, it might mean building some new backend software for your 1-day month. If you're a writer, it might mean producing or writing 2 chapters of high-quality written content. If you're a consultant, maybe it's scoping out, a 2.5-year engagement for your client with all the touch points mapped out in advance and the whole project architected. But some less obvious ones, because you may be thinking, it just doesn't really apply to, what I do, what my main pursuits in life are. I'm a salesperson, I can't, a 1-day a month of sales, doesn't even, how would that work? Well, if you're a salesperson, there are still high leverage activities you can do outside of your primary function. If you're a salesperson, for example, you could dedicate your 1-day month to rebuilding your script based on customer analysis, or to studying sales for a day, to a high leverage activity. So often your 1-day month is going to involve you living in that leverage gap. You doing an activity that's not going to produce results instantly, but that's going to facilitate an increase in output value, more sales closed, for a decrease in input cost, less sales calls taken in this example. Next thing you could do, let's say if you're a doctor, how would a doctor do a 1-day month? They just cram all their patients in 1 day and try and, give endless exams or something like that? Well, if you're a doctor, what you could do is learn a new method of diagnosis that saves immense amounts of time downstream. Or you could learn a new technology within your specific specialty that's going to allow you to more rapidly execute on something or produce a better result for your patients downstream. If you're a therapist and you see people hourly, you could build a new client onboarding platform for your business. That means that you never ever have to schedule with a client again. So again, you get that leverage effect. So anyone can deploy the 1-day month for something, and anyone can deploy it for accelerated learning, because there's presumably topics you want to learn more about, or topics you already know a lot about that you want to learn even more about. So if you're at a loss as to what to deploy your 1-day month on, firstly ask yourself, what are some unlocking moves I could make? What are some high yield, high leverage activities I could do to increase my output value relative to my input costs downstream? And then, is there a topic I want to learn? Because you could just do your 1-day month on learning. Now, for identifying your highest leverage task, firstly, you want to ask, what is the meat of what I get paid to do? If I could only perform exceptionally at one thing, what would it be? Because your task likely lies in this domain. And then what task, if I complete it, would make everything else I'm doing redundant or unnecessary? What task, if I complete it, will increase my output per unit of input, allowing me to do more with less downstream? And these are things that reduce future demands on your time, energy, or attention. Now let's talk for a moment about the frequency of the 1 day month, because you might be thinking, why is he telling us to do a month's worth of work in a day? I thought I was supposed to limit my hours. I thought I was supposed to not focus on the amount of time I'm working. Well, that's correct. Here's the thing. You want to only run this 1 day month infrequently. It's a sporadic thing that you do. And again, you also want to be focusing your 1 day month around output and leverage. The purpose of it is not to be proud that you worked a ton of hours in a day. The purpose of it is to produce a month's worth of output, worth of accomplishment in a day. And so long as the frequency of the 1 day month is sporadic, it should not lead to work overload, to that burnout trigger. If you start doing 1 day months every day, you are going to trigger work overload. You're going to trigger the burnout trigger, work overload, and just get fried. So ideally, you do it at an acceleration level. This is a little bit more modest, and this means doing a 1 day month, maybe once per month. And you can just schedule it in on a recurring basis. Maybe the first Friday of every month, you do a 1 day month to lead into your month with an immense surge in output that creates momentum that you can ride, or that creates leverage that allows you to do more with less every day for the rest of your month. Or you could go to turbo mode, where you do a 1 day month once every week. You're gonna have to really be careful with your recovery and your sleep if you do that, but you could do that. Or if you need to, for a certain limited period of time, given some constraints that are happening within your life or business, you could go into light speed mode, where you do a 1 day month, every day for, let's say, 5 days a week. And you want to try and avoid ever having to do this ideally in your life, because it's not optimal, but it's important to have the skill in your back pocket. And even just having the skill in your back pocket adds a level of just confidence and self-efficacy, conviction in your ability to execute. Now, light speed involves doing it, as I said, 5 days a week, but you only want to ever do this if you absolutely have to, for a book deadline, maybe launching a new product, starting a new company and needing to seize market share for some reason before your competition does. But the cool thing is with going into this kind of light speed mode, you can accomplish literally years worth of work in weeks. And this is how a lot of people achieve the impossible. But you want to be really careful about this, because you're probably going to burn yourself out if you do this. You're going to knowingly burn yourself out. But again, there may be a situation in life where, for example, you've started a company, a competitor's coming up, and if you don't scale rapidly and clasp market share, they will beat you and your company will die, or whatever. Or maybe, a book deadline has come around, you'll lose the entire book deal if you don't get it done. So there are situations sometimes where it makes sense to go into light speed mode and have really regular 1 day months, but be aware of what can happen if you do that. Now, the next thing to mention before we wrap up here is just something actually surprisingly important, even though it's a little bit subtle, and it's to really ritualize the 1 day month. Treat it as almost like a sacred experience where you're dedicating yourself to accelerating towards whatever the most meaningful impact or goals are in your life. Buy the nicest, healthiest food for yourself for that day. Spend the money on it. Do the most pleasant recovery activities that day. Spend the money on it. Hire someone to come in and give you a massage in the middle of the day during one of your recovery blocks, for example. Or go and pay to be able to quickly do a workout on the beach in your favorite gym or something like that. Really ritualize it and add little pleasantries into your 1 day month. Now, the exercise for today is executing your 1 day month. I want you to schedule it onto your calendar at least one time per month as a repeating event, and pick when you're going to do that. And then what you got to do, obviously, is identify your highest leverage task And then the day before your 1 day month, you want to define your clear goals, prep the entire task, map it onto the calendar for the next day so you know what you're trying to achieve by the end of each flow block and it's incremented out. And then deploy active recovery and guard your sleep. Automate everything in terms of decisions, ensure you're blocked on all tech, and alert everyone in your life that you're going dark so you don't have cognitive load or anxiety wondering if people are trying to contact you. So that's the 1 day month, powerful tool to have in your peak performance arsenal. Use it with care and responsibility. And until next time, all the best.